Hey you guys, I'm in my studio and I'm here to guide you through your first acrylic painting. You are going, oh, let's not smear it. We're going to be making this. Um, what I want you guys to think about, two basic concepts. We're going to worry about light and dark just because we're only using white and black paint. So that I'm hoping that's somewhat simple for you and you have some familiarity of doing that just because of drawing classes. But then the other thing I want you to try to figure out is how we blend acrylic and how we don't blend acrylic. So like hard and soft edges. Trying to think what else to tell you. Probably painting's a little difficult to give you exact steps what to do because a lot of painting you just have to experience and try different brushes, try to add more water, less water to see what works for you. So just try your best with this painting. If you've never painted before, just try it and see what happens. Okay, so for the supplies, you need to get something to paint on. I am using a wooden panel that's been gessoed. I also have a palette. I'm using an old pizza plate. You just need something that's nice and smooth and will not absorb the paint. I'm using white acrylic paint and black. And then you also need some paintbrushes in different sizes and a cup of water, a rag, and then a pencil to draw. Step one is just going to be sketching in the basic painting shapes. You're going to just draw it on the canvas or the panel using a pencil. Step two, you're going to put globs of paint on your palette. I'm pointing out where my globs are so that you notice they're off to the side and the middle is reserved for mixing paint. Now I'm going to block in my canvas by mixing a whole bunch of water with a little bit of paint to make this like watery paint mixture. I'm also using a big brush to cover very quickly because I'm going to try to cover my whole canvas with approximate color of the background. So that's going to be white in that, not exactly middle, but off to the side, going to gray, then going to black. So I mixed the white and now I'm putting in this gray color of paint on both sides of the white. You need to play around with how much water to paint you should mix. So I would just try different things right now. At this stage, I like to have it pretty watery, so I add a lot of water. But you can see my palette there. I'm just mixing different small pools of gray color. So as I go to the right, I'm making it slightly darker gray. And then I'm adding that same color on the left. One thing I want you to figure out is how we blend paint. So it's a little somewhat challenging to blend acrylic paint. The best way to blend acrylic paint is while it's wet. So you need to be a little bit focused on this section to get paint down and blended well because the acrylic paint will dry very quickly. So you have a small window in which to blend it easily. So I would be doing two things right now. If this was my first time painting, I would be playing around with the consistency and also playing around with how we blend it. Ideally, if the whole paint is wet, like the whole canvas, I can just go back and forth with my paintbrush to blend those colors together. And I just had to note that what we want is a smooth blended background. So I'm putting paint down and then I'm going back and forth trying to blend that out. And I'm also using a very soft brush at this point. Okay, this has all been on like real speed, so I'm just putting this double time. So when you do black and white painting, you really need to think about value, and we want to try a good painting will have what we call a range of value. It'll have black paint, it'll have different shades of gray paint and white paint. A really boring black and white painting will just have slightly different shades of gray. So you really want to push yourself to go dark because that's hard for a lot of us. We tend to play it safe and just want to put gray, but you really want to make sure you have dark paint somewhere on your canvas. And then in this block-in stage, one point of it is to cover the canvas with paint. We don't want any white showing unless it's part of our original picture. So again, I'm just going back and still trying to put in that dark paint. And I'm just trying to work quickly while my background is all wet. I'm trying to make sure this looks like somewhat even and isn't all patchy. Notice I'm still just using those different pools of gray. Because acrylic paint can dry so quick, it can be useful to just work on one side. So I'm working on that left side and trying to blend it all together while that paint's wet. And then I'll move over and do a similar thing to the right side. But for right now, I'm just working on that left side because I gotta go quick while it's wet. And I'm hoping this is like a really fun painting for you all, that it's not too stressful or worrisome. So I'm just going to go back and try to lighten up that middle part. So I'm just using pure white paint at this point. I keep on going painting vertical strokes, but you could do horizontal strokes as well. There's no rule at all. Okay, so now I am done the block in and I'm just going to start what I call the regular painting. So I'm just using regular paint, I'm mixing different grays and then using a brush to apply them on the canvas. For this image, it's trees in a forest, right? So I'm starting with the really light gray vertical strokes and extending them up and then slightly branching them out. And I'm just going to do this on both sides. So now I don't have to worry about my color blending anymore. So I'm just putting paint strokes on this blended background. I think now in a way, um, you guys, the acrylic painters, have the advantage over our oil painters because our oil painters have to worry about their trees blending in with the background. But because your background is already dry, you're fine. Okay, so we're going to keep on adding these trees going off to the sides of the canvas, but you just have to mentally check yourself that as you move to the sides, the trees get darker. And I just had a note that if you're having trouble drawing the trees, like if your paint stroke doesn't flow nicely or catches on the canvas, you can add a drop or two of water to your paint to make it a little more liquidy and flow. Generally, as a rule, we begin with, we called it thinned out paint. We add a lot of water to the paint when we first start, and the more layers you put on, the less water you should add. But because this is only our second layer of paint, we can still add a drop or two of water, and that's fine. Okay, so I'm hoping this is getting to be a little enjoyable for you. You're figuring out this process as you paint. You're just going to continue adding in trees, making them darker as you go. For the most part, like you could put some dark towards the middle, whatever you want. But they should be darker trees at the very edge of the canvas, especially on that left side. It could be more helpful to paint upside down and know that you should start your stroke at the trunk and then just pull that stroke down to form the trunk of the tree. Usually, our brush is loaded with paint, so the first part of the canvas we touch, that will be the darkest part of the stroke. So we want to begin that at the base of the tree. And again, this is a lot of talk. I'm hoping you'll figure some of this stuff out. Like if you're getting confused while I'm talking, hopefully just by painting something in the process, you'll start to figure some of this out. I'm just trying to give you hints and tips so as I can. Okay, so I'm just trying to add in some of those darker trees now. Atmospheric perspective, the rules of atmospheric perspective tell us that the farther away something is, the lighter and actually the bluer it gets. That's why mountains are so blue in the distance when we drive, right? So you can make your figure look farther or closer away based on how dark he is. He actually might be a little too dark in my painting, I think. So I'm a little worried about how light this ground is, so I'm going to mix a slightly darker gray and put it down here. Now there is an idea about painting we haven't really talked about, and that's you judge how good a color is based on how it looks on your painting. A lot of times we'll mix a color on a palette and it looks perfect, and then when we put it on our painting, it's not perfect. So then we have to adjust it. So sometimes in this demo, you'll see me make a stroke and then go back and mix a totally different color. And that's just, I put it on the canvas and I didn't like it. That's a little better, darker now. Okay, so this is where you have a lot more freedom. I want you to look at your picture and decide where you want more trees. You can make this forest as dense and as dark as you want. It's entirely up to you, and it's dependent on how many dark trees you put in. Anytime we do a painting, it's good to take a break and then look at the painting later on. I do not like how light this painting is. It needs to be a lot darker. So I'm going to do a special technique, and this technique is called scumbling. I get an old hard bristle brush and a rag. I mix a color of paint. In this case, I'm going to use SCUMBLE to darken my ground. So I'm mixing a dark gray. I get the dark gray on my brush, and then what's counterintuitive, I take my rag and wipe off most of that paint. So I only have a little paint left on the brush. Now I'm very gently going to rub that brush against my canvas. So just the top part of the canvas, like that top part of the grain, will catch some of that darker color. This is entirely dependent on how hard you press. You want to have a really light, nice touch. I need to make this color a lot darker. And again, wipe it off because we don't want to be extreme. But now again, very lightly touch your canvas and kind of rub that color in. This is called scumbling, or the equivalent in watercolor is called dry brushing. And scumbling is a really good way to mix your acrylic paint together once it's dry. If you're painting on a dry surface, scumbling can help blend those colors. So you should scumble. This works best with a hard, thick bristle brush, though. Like if all your brushes are soft, you're going to have a hard time scumbling. You can still try it, though. And your paint, it's going to be hard to describe, but your paint needs to be less liquidy. So some artists will purposely use dried out paint for this thing. So they might even put their acrylic paint on newspaper to suck out the moisture for it quicker, so that they can scumble more. So you can see that this area is getting a lot darker now. Unfortunately, it's getting a lot more patchy dark, right? Like it's darker, but there's these areas, it's not an even darkness. Okay, so scumbling part is is done, and now I'm just back to my regular acrylic painting. I'm looking and figuring out, I think I need more dark trees, right? I feel like they're all the same grayish color. And then also this, again, this ground floor is like kind of a mess from the scumble, so I'm gonna mix medium gray to blend that all together. I tried to make this video on regular time or double time, but not going any quicker than that. Okay, so again, while the color's wet, I can mix it together well. This is my very much loved little tiny brush. It's taped in 2 places and broken in half, but I still love it. So I'm gonna add in some small branches. So I'm using this small paintbrush to do so. And remember that again, if your paint feels too thick or it just won't flow, you can still add a little bit of water. So you need to stand back and decide, like, where do you want darker trees? Where do you need to put more trees? I still think I need some darker trees on that left-hand side. If we have lighter trees, they'll imply they're more in the distance. If we have darker trees, they'll imply they're closer to us. So adding in different values of trees, lighter or darker, will give us more space in the painting and make it look less flat. In art, the idea of space and something not being flat is incredibly important for realistic art. I'm so happy I'm finally adding the dark tree over on that left side. So partly art is just learning instincts, or stepping back and judging things. Like you have to learn to evaluate your own painting and decide what needs to be different. There's a story about Leonardo da Vinci that he would stand staring at his paintings for almost a whole day. Okay, so I don't know about this figure. I think that figure actually needs to be a little lighter. Okay, I'm still trying to darken in this area. So once again, I'm using SCUMBLING to darken. SCUMBLING can be used for more than just darkening things, but I just have to make this painting in particular a lot darker, so I keep on using SCUMBLING to do the darkening. SCUMBLING is something that helps us blend acrylic paint though. Some students do the opposite of SCUMBLING in that they get their paint and they just add tons of water to it to make it waterier, and then they paint that over. So you should try both ways, like using really dry paint and scrubbing it into the canvas and using wet paint to lightly go on top. Okay, so here's a case where I'm going to use SCUMBLING to actually lighten something. So I'm going to use my much loved small brush, and I'm just going to scumble really lightly a light gray over that dark figure to kind of lighten it a little bit. And again, this is just pressure. I'm putting on really light pressure just to slightly put like a haze of color on top. Okay, so I'm coming towards the end of this now, so I'm just going to brighten that middle section by using pure white paint straight onto the canvas. I'm going to mix some light grays and add in some light grays. Now notice I can correct my tree trunks by painting in the background. But this is something you kind of have to be careful about. You don't want to get carried away and have to like redo all the background in between the tree trunks. But you can do it slightly. and then add in a couple more trees if needed. Okay, so in the original image, this is kind of dotted. So I'm just adding in small little texture strokes using my brush. Again, this is just for us to play around and get used to paint. So try making little slight, small texture bumps here. The trick is to keep the grays related. Okay, and then this is our finished painting, you guys. Good job.